My name is Thor Sawin, and I am an associate professor of applied linguistics at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. I teach mostly applied linguistics classes to future language teachers. I've also worked a lot as an English as a foreign language teacher. I teach German at the Middlebury Language Schools. I got interested in this realm of language learning apps primarily at first as a language learner, someone who's lived in a lot of places. Whenever I travel overseas, I love to learn a little bit of the language that I'm going to be hearing in the place that I go. And I've always been frustrated as an applied linguist about what's on offer, what's available with these different language learning apps. I think that my frustration isn't unique. I can think of one story when I was in Turkey traveling on a bus in a fairly rural part of the country, and I saw a woman sitting next to me who was doing Duolingo for English on her cell phone. And I looked over and I recognized from Duolingo that she was fairly advanced. She had worked very far into the app and into the app's offerings. And so I asked her in English, "Hello, how's it going?" She was paralyzed in fear. She couldn't open her mouth. She couldn't say anything, even answer the question, "What is your name?" And she just kept saying in Turkish to me, "Oh, I don't speak English." And I was like, well, she's gotten very far along in this app. When I got back to California, we were talking about elective offerings in our program, and we were talking about different technology offerings. And I just said one day in a meeting, what we need is a class about language apps where we're not learning the various language apps, but we're learning to analyze them critically, to think about what they offer, what they don't, how that lines up with what we know about second language acquisition, with what we know about language pedagogy, and kind of train a next generation of language teachers to think critically and to design new uses for the apps that are available. And my department chair was like, well, why don't you teach that class? So as I was thinking about this, how most language classrooms work is sort of a diagram like this. The language enters the classroom basically through the teacher, the choices that the teacher makes to bring materials into the room. It seems to me the really interesting possibility of an apps is that you could rethink of the language classroom so that it's really the language is entering the world through the learner's mobile phones. It's the mobile phones that live on the boundary between the classroom and the larger world. And then what happens inside the classroom is really sense-making. What is coming into their classroom through their own choices, through their own apps. This has the advantage of also reconceptualizing what a language learner is. Traditionally, a language learner is a student in the language classroom. So here's the teacher, there's the learners, and usually mobile phones are actually banned. But with mobile phones, the learner could actually become the manager of their own personal language acquisition project. This learner is going to live a long time, way after they finish my language class, and I am just going to be there for a short amount of time. This learner is also going to always be having a mobile phone or some kind of device. Best thing that I can do as a teacher is really to teach the learner how to make use of the apps that are available, how to think critically about the apps that are available on the phone so that they can continue to learn. They can, no matter what classes they're in, or if they're not able to afford a class, or if there is no class available. Apps have a lot of potential, but are they living up to that potential? Me and my colleague Gabriel Guillen, a co-author of this book, did a study on what the most popular language learning apps teach. We basically looked at lists of the 50 most downloaded language apps on iPads on the Google Play Store, and we tried to analyze what they're doing. Mark Pegram talks about these 4 different models. Tutorials basically automated feedback. It just gives you instant feedback on what you're doing. Content, you're consuming content which is delivered to you based on your interest or maybe based on your language level. Communication would be back and forth interaction. Then creation would be apps that are designed for language learners to actually create in the language. What most apps are doing is automated feedback, maybe a little bit of reading. If we look at what kinds of language features are being taught by these language apps, it's far and away lexical semantics. Most of the language apps that are out there, the top downloaded apps, are just teaching you vocabulary in an automatic way which says, you're wrong, or ding, 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 you're correct. But the kind of lexical grammar that you would really need to use language well, and especially the pragmatics, the lingual culture, this is almost completely absent in the app. And those are the exact areas that language learners need in order to be able to use the language freely. And what makes me a little nervous about the fact that so many of the apps that are easiest to find if I just want to learn a language, that they're only teaching me really vocabulary skills, and they're mostly doing it through tutorial functions. is that the world could be full of people like this woman on the Turkish bus who spends a lot of time and even a lot of money on a language app, only to find that she can't actually use the language in the situations where she needs to. What this could end up doing in a world full of overhyped language apps that don't actually deliver on their promises or only teach the lowest hanging fruit. In that world, people almost end up getting inoculated to language learning. They get a little bit of the language learning, but just enough to learn that they're not good at it or that it's not really effective. We actually could be taking away the market of language learning and teaching a whole generation of people that language learning is ineffective, when in fact apps have a lot of potential. And that's what I'd like to talk about, is ways that apps are being integrated well into language instruction and what we could do in the future. What I was just talking about is the apps alone model of integrating apps into someone's personal language acquisition project. That would look like depending on really an app to do everything for me as a language learner. I think a more helpful way to think about what apps could do is that apps could really be used together with a language classroom, and the apps could fill in the gaps, do the things that the teachers can't do. Apps do vocabulary review far better than a teacher could. Apps can give individualized pronunciation feedback, such as using ELSA for English pronunciation, far better, far more consistently, far more immediately than a language teacher could ever do. Apps might be better at scouring the internet and finding texts that are perfectly at that learner's vocabulary level, delivering them, having an integrated dictionary. That's a lot of work for a language teacher, and it probably makes a lot more sense for me as a teacher to let the apps do those parts of my learner's language development. Apps can really authenticate the language classroom. You can use WhatsApp or any of the social media apps to actually have a legitimate conversation with another speaker of this language or other learners in a faraway place with whom there's a real information gap. I think another interesting way that you could use apps to authenticate the language classroom is by thinking about the authentic texts that are available through a mobile phone, the authentic tasks, the things that people actually accomplish via their mobile phone, and the authentic tools that they would use in order to do it. A German student says, I have them pick a restaurant in the inner city of Schwäbisch Gmünd. So here I have 3 different restaurants, and I could divide my students into groups where they do research using Yelp or using the Google reviews in the German version of Google Maps to read and to make recommendations, to discover what's good in each of these restaurants, what are its pros and cons related to price, to service, to menu. Then I scramble the groups and share out, and then pick which one of these 3 restaurants they would best eat at, and I could give different groups different parameters. Right, so I'm sort of simulating that is an authentic task. If I was really in Germany, I would be using my mobile phone. I would be using Yelp or Google Maps. So this can make my whole language classroom far more authentic than what I would be able to do in a classroom. So here's an app that the German government created for newcomers to Germany. I could have my learners predict in German what they think would be on the app, what sorts of skills learners would need. They could actually download the app and experience what the German government is providing for them in terms of support to help them learn the German language, to make sense of the various things that they're going to encounter as an outsider, as a newcomer to Germany. And that's really the experience my own learners have. I could use apps either formally as a learning management system. I mean, many of the learning management systems we use have an app format, but I mean posting, having learners upload audio recordings that they record with their mobile apps in class, writings, social media, blog posts, screenshots of recipes, screenshots of weather forecasts, that they take these things and are able to upload this into a system that allows me as a teacher to track what they're doing. An easy way to do this is through WhatsApp conversations that my learners are a part of, but they can do Google Docs or any other format as well. Apps can be great support to accompany a field experience, and having note-taking capabilities on the app, learners being able to record the conversations that they get in, the conversations they overhear, the announcements at the airport, the announcements on the bus. All of this can really make my mobile phone into a field toolkit of things that I can use as I'm out interacting with real speakers. At the Middlebury Institute and my colleague Gabriel Guillen's Spanish classes, Spanish learners will meet with English learners and they'll tell each other stories, record these stories on their mobile phone, and play back the stories and be able to pause them to elicit the new vocabulary. They can jot down the new vocabulary that they're learning in their notes on their app. Then they can later take those notes, upload those into an app like Quizlet. They can find photographs or even Instagram posts to make their flashcards more interesting and more authentic. And because they have that mobile phone with them, they can always be listening to those recordings of the conversations that they had elicited. And they can be communicating via WhatsApp or social media with their partner, with their learning partner. So the mobile phone really transforms the tandem learning experience by allowing more data, allowing learners to reflect better on the language data they have. One day we might find ourselves at the position where apps really can function as sort of a standalone language learning guide, that the same app would feed me vocabulary and readings and be a podcast source, that it would allow me to personally track and manage and practice my new vocabulary at perfectly spaced intervals, that would be integrated with a language corpus app, which would allow me to explore and discover more about the new vocabulary forms that I'm learning, that I could upload recordings of myself pronouncing new words and get instantaneous feedback on exactly which segments I'm having difficulty with, or to visualize my intonation patterns. The sky is the limit really for the future of language learning apps. We're not there yet, but I think that apps are an amazing accompaniment to the language classroom or to the language field experience. The most exciting thing for me in this field that I've been a part of is what we're calling the Mavericks of the Mind initiative, to think about what could we do to bring second language acquisitionists, language teachers, intercultural competence practitioners, together with the traditional people you find in the app world, user experience designers, marketers, and computer programmers, to create the really high quality sort of app that would live up to its potential in all of these areas. We've written a manifesto of 8 statements that we think are true of language pedagogy, and some of these relate to apps. The fact that language learning is ultimately about empathy and hospitality, we don't yet see apps actually doing this, helping us to embody and experience another person's world. We don't really see many apps with a strong social impact agenda, seeking to make language learning available to the people who haven't been able to experience it in the past, and seeking to center the voices which have been marginalized. Mobile phones were designed for interpersonal communication, just like language itself was, and yet so many of the apps that are easiest to find, that are flooding the market, have no interpersonal communication built in. They're really just tutorial games that don't involve communicating an idea at all. So right now, the off-the-shelf language apps often leave something to be desired. We recognize this as learners of languages and as teachers of a language. But I really think there's so many other kinds of apps, trained apps, weather apps, social media apps, that can really be integrated into a language classroom or into a learning field experience that can really make those things far better than they would be without the app. And we hope that by assembling together a dream team of different people, we could one day arrive at the kind of app that fully lives up to its potential as truly communicative, truly intercultural, empathy building, and has a real strong impact on our society.